I'm going to bring in Mohamed Elmasry. He's a media studies professor and political analyst at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. I want to talk about the ripple effect that these protests that we're seeing in the US are having, because we've just seen pictures about the protests that are going on at Sciences Po University in France. We've seen other protests around the world as well. All of this, I would imagine, being driven by the presence of social media, the ability for the students, say, in the US campuses, to be able to film what's going on and immediately spread that across the world. Talk to us about the impact that that's having.
Social media has been a game changer. There's no question about it. Mainstream media in the West, and if we want to look at the United States in particular, is notorious for adopting the sort of official line. Not because there is official censorship, of course there isn't, but because these Western media apparatuses, like the American apparatus or the British apparatus, have what media scholars call structural constraints in place, right? There are these kind of filters that end up dictating what kind of news is produced, right? This is why you see such a sharp departure if you watch CNN or if you read the New York Times from, say, what you get on Democracy Now! Or in The Intercept or on Al Jazeera or in the Middle East Eye and other outlets, not only of what's happening in Gaza, but even of what's happening on the ground with the protests. So students are able to use social media. And remember, young people are most likely to be plugged into these social media sites like X, Instagram, and TikTok. So they're getting one version of reality that departs significantly from the reality that is being depicted by mainstream media. They've galvanized support for the Palestinian cause. And it's not surprising, therefore, to see all these opinion polls that show it's young people that are most likely to be sympathetic with the Palestinians and to be critical of Israel and Western policy vis-a-vis Gaza, because they are the ones who are plugged into these social media sites.
It's World Press Freedom Day. We've been talking about that earlier on. Obviously, as we were reporting, the Palestinian reporters in Gaza being awarded for their work there. I wanted to talk to you about World Press Freedom generally. You were referring, interestingly, to the structural constraints within certain Western organizations, particularly when it comes to reporting certain things. But what else are we seeing in terms of the kind of constraints and repressions that are being put on the press around the world, particularly at a time when it is so important, when people are protesting in relation to the war in Gaza, when it comes to getting that message out?
Well, one of the really important structural constraints that media scholars talk about is sourcing. So if you want to cover the news, if you work for the New York Times or the Washington Post, who do you end up talking to at the end of the day? You end up talking to government officials. Well, we know that overwhelmingly United States government officials, for instance, are supporting Israel officially, right? And they're also supported by AIPAC, the biggest lobby organization in the United States, the pro-Israel lobby. So that's one of the reasons why you end up getting the kind of coverage that you get. It's interesting to know, you're talking about World Press Freedom Day. Well, Reporters Without Borders released their World Press Freedom Index for 2024. It's just released within the last 12 or 14 hours. And the United States actually dipped pretty sharply. They're down to 55th in the world in the press freedom rankings. And in their report, it's pretty scathing. Reporters Without Borders is talking about how U.S. officials are calling for the arrest of journalists. They're talking about the protests, and they're talking about how journalists have been barred from covering the protests in some instances. They're talking about how journalists have been assaulted and arrested. So the United States is actually taking a hit here, not only politically and in terms of their global standing, but also in terms of how they're viewed as a center for global journalism.
Mohamed Elmasry, we appreciate you being with us on Al Jazeera. Thank you very much indeed.